There's a specific name for what keeps happening when you try to learn about AI at work and can't seem to make it stick. It isn't a learning problem. It isn't a discipline problem. It's something much more specific than either of those. And once you have the name, the whole pattern looks completely different. Not different in a motivational way. Different in the way that changes what you do next. This video is about that name, and about what becomes possible the moment you stop explaining your own behavior wrong. Here's what the loop actually looks like. And it's worth saying out loud, because most people carrying it have never heard it described from the outside. You open the tool, maybe it's the 3rd time this month, maybe the 8th time this year. You type something, a question about your work, a request for help with something you're behind on. The output comes back, and something about it is off. It's too generic, or too confident about the wrong things, or it sounds like someone who has read about your job but has never actually done it. And in that moment, in the 3 or 4 seconds between reading the output and deciding what to do next, something happens that has nothing to do with the tool. A quiet conclusion forms. Not a thought exactly, more like a settling. This isn't for someone like me. You close the tab, you tell yourself you'll come back to it when you have more time, when you understand it better, when there's a clearer use case. But the time comes, and you don't go back. And then, this is the part that matters. You explain it to yourself. You call it distraction, busyness, resistance to change. You maybe call it laziness, at least in the moments when you're being hard on yourself. And that explanation, the self-diagnosis, is the most consequential part of the whole loop. Not because it's painful, because it's wrong. And as long as it's wrong, nothing you try next will work, because you're solving for the wrong problem. So let's talk about what's actually happening beneath that pattern. When someone who has spent 20 years becoming genuinely good at something opens a tool that produces output that feels wrong, the brain doesn't register that as a tool problem. It registers it as a competence signal. And here's why that matters. The research on shame and learning is remarkably consistent on one thing. Shame doesn't just feel bad. It actively interferes with the brain's ability to absorb and retain new information. There's a reason for that. Shame redirects cognitive resources away from the task in front of you and toward managing the threat to your self-image. When shame is active, the brain is not in learning mode, it is in protection mode, which means every time you've tried to engage with AI tools from inside a shame state, every course, every tutorial, every experimental open tab, your brain was doing exactly what brains do under threat, scanning for exits, not absorbing content. And here's the part that almost no one says clearly enough. The more competent you are, the sharper the shame response tends to be, not despite your expertise. Because of it, when you spent 20 years being the person who knows things, the person others come to, the person who doesn't need to ask, being a beginner doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels like a category error, like something has gone wrong at a fundamental level. Research on what's sometimes called the stigma of seeking information found that the probability of someone asking for help drops dramatically when asking appears to signal lower competence. Not because people don't want to learn, because the cost of looking like they need to feels higher than the cost of not knowing. That pattern is not weakness. It is a completely predictable response to a specific combination of factors: high prior competence, rapid external change, and a professional identity built on knowing. Put those 3 things together and you don't get laziness. You get a shame loop that blocks the very learning it keeps telling you that you need. Because shame converts output quality into a verdict about the person. The tool produced something imperfect. The brain, in protection mode, translated that as, "You don't belong here." That's not a technology problem. Now, here's where the shift happens. You were not failing to adapt. You were trying to learn in a neurological state that blocks learning. Those are completely different things. One is a story about who you are. The other is a story about what was happening externally, mechanically, predictably. Every time you sat down to try, the ground moved. You didn't. And the specific ground that moved wasn't just the tools. It was the rate of change, which is genuinely, measurably unlike anything that has come before it in professional life. The professionals who feel the most disoriented right now are often the ones who built the most. Because they built the most to be disrupted. That disorientation is not a character flaw. It is the correct response to an external reality. And it makes complete sense that you haven't moved forward yet, because you've been trying to move forward while carrying a weight the brain wasn't designed to learn under. Here's what the loop actually is. External disruption triggers competence threat. Competence threat activates shame. Shame suppresses the brain's learning capacity. Attempts to learn under shame produce poor absorption. Poor absorption feels like more evidence of inadequacy, which intensifies the shame, which makes the next attempt harder to start. That is a mechanism. It runs on its own once it's in motion, and willpower, more discipline, more commitment, more aggressive goal setting about when you'll finally do it is not what interrupts a mechanism. What interrupts it is changing the conditions, specifically, changing what you're trying to do in the first interaction and what you're using that interaction to prove, because the shame loop runs on performance. It is activated by the implicit question, am I good enough at this? And the exit from it is removing that question entirely from the first step. This is what mid-transition looks like. Not knowing and not yet doing is not a verdict. It is a phase, temporary, named, and passable once you stop treating it as evidence of something permanent. If what just landed here is the thing you've been missing, not more information about AI, but a way to actually clear what's been blocking it, there's a resource in the description built specifically for that. It's called the AI Shame Reset. It's a guided audio and workbook that works through the psychological mechanism directly, so your brain can actually receive what comes next. Not technical instruction, the emotional prerequisite for it. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So here is what actually works differently. Not a different tool, not a different tutorial, a different relationship to what the first interaction is for. The shame loop activates when the first interaction is a test, when some part of you is watching the output to find out whether you're the kind of person who can do this. The exit is making the first interaction not a test. Here's the specific action, and it's smaller than anything you've been telling yourself you need to do. Before Friday, open Claude, or whichever tool is closest, and type this: I work in your field. What's one specific task someone in my role could use this tool for that would take less than 10 minutes? That's it. That's the whole step. You're not learning AI. You're not testing yourself. You're running a low-stakes information request in a state where your brain is not in protection mode because there's nothing to perform. You already know how to think. The tool just moves faster. And what comes back from that question is going to be either useful or not useful. Either way, you'll know something specific. Something about whether this tool is actually relevant to the work you actually do, that no course or tutorial has been able to tell you, because those require you to learn in the abstract before you have any reason to care. The reason to care comes from one real task, not from preparation for one real task. From the task itself. What you have now is not a new plan, it's a new diagnosis, and the difference matters because you've had plenty of plans. The shame loop has been neutralizing them. What you have now is the name of the loop, which means you can see it from the outside instead of living inside it as if it were the truth. If you want to go deeper on this, past naming it, into actually clearing it, the resource in the description is the next step. It was built exactly for this moment in the process. There's usually a specific moment when the loop started. A first failed attempt, a meeting, something someone said. What was yours? So here's what you actually have at the end of this. Not a tool, not a technique, a reframe that changes what everything after it means. You were not failing to adapt. You were trying to learn in a state that neurologically blocks learning. That state has a name now. The mechanism has a name. And the exit from the mechanism is not discipline. It's changing one variable, what the first interaction is trying to prove. The action is still waiting. Open the tool. Type the question, not to prove anything, just to find out. What you built over 20 years didn't become irrelevant. It became the thing that makes what comes next actually useful. The judgment, the context, the ability to read a room that no tool can replicate. You're not behind. You've been in a loop that made moving feel impossible. Those are not the same thing. And now you have the name for the difference. That name is yours. Before Tuesday.